Chapter 15. Bullet dozed his way through that morning's classes. He would enter a classroom as the bell rang, slouch down in his seat with his legs stretched out, let his chin fall down onto his chest, and close his eyes. Images played against the dark screen of his lowered eyelids, and voices sounded inside his head, all the pictures and sounds jumbled together. He couldn't keep track of them. He felt off balance, as if his muscles were running without any central controlling agency, and he could sense outward to where his ankles crossed, or his arms folded across his stomach to reassure himself of his own stillness. Then he would doze off. Next thing he knew, the bell rang and he got up to go to his next class. He ate lunch outside, feeling pretty rested, considering. As he leaned back against the bricks and chewed at his sandwiches, a chilly wind blew against his face and the sun shone sharp. He wouldn't be able to sleep during shop. They didn't even have chairs, just tall stools. So he turned away from the lines of moving students, drifted around the back of the building, and headed for the street. Once there, he started to run. He ran fast, hard, the 3 miles to Patrice's. Whatever else, his body was in good working order, working well to his orders. Patrice opened the door, surprised to see him, the dark eyes sharp and curious, although all he said was "Come in." He had covered his table with newspapers and spread the parts of a motor on that. He was cleaning the parts, with gasoline in a plastic basin. "You have come early." Bullet peeled off his sweater and sat down. Patrice got back to work, his hands scrubbing, polishing. "When I think of it, you are the opposite of the $1 scholar. You come a little earlier now. You aren't racing with your team," he added. Bullet looked up. "I deduce this from your name not being mentioned in the newspaper." He reached out a hand and dripped gasoline onto the article in front of Bullet. "The sports section." "I didn't know you read the paper." "It is only once a week. They send it to me for nothing. Sometimes when I spread it out, my eye glances over it." "You're laughing at me." "Yes, a little. Do you mind?" Bullet shrugged. "If you want to do something, you could clean these spark plugs. Not that lazy scraping with a screwdriver, but with this steel wool. Do you want to do that?" "Okay, but I wondered. There are a few hours. We could go out for some oysters." Patrice shook his head. Bullet got up and stood looking out a window toward the dock. "I have emptied the gas tank. There is a leak." Behind him Patrice's voice went on, describing how he would solder the cracked metal. Bullet let the words flow around him, not listening. He would have liked a few hours of hard labor. "Hello, hello," Patrice said. Bullet turned around. "It isn't that you need money, is it?" Bullet shook his head. "I just thought," he said. He sat down again and picked up a piece of steel wool. "Is this for the 14-footer?" he asked. "No, for that one I'll get a new motor. I've decided that. Nothing but the best. It will be my best work, that one." They worked in silence for a long time. Bullet stared at his own hands, working patiently, slowly. He concentrated on his fingers, scouring at the crud and the chemical deposits on the spark plugs. Patrice soaked, scrubbed, and polished dry, not talking for a change. Bullet's legs and shoulders wanted to move, wanted to work, but he concentrated on his fingers. Finally, Patrice asked, "Something is wrong?" Bullet met the bright dark eyes and said nothing, did nothing, didn't even shrug. His mind seemed frozen, caught in some kind of panic, like a cramped muscle. Patrice waited, and Bullet answered him at last. "Yeah, something I did. I don't like it. What I did." "This is a phenomenon." "Yeah, I know how that sounds, but it's true. Always before I liked what I did." He smiled reluctantly. "I know it's funny." "I don't know about funny, but lucky." Bullet did laugh then. "Lucky." Patrice saw the humor, but protested. "I mean it. There comes a time when you can no longer compromise. I've amused you again, but I mean that. I could be wrong, but I do mean it." He got up from the table. "If you would put these things away, please, and clear up that mess, I'll begin dinner. You'll stay?" "Sure." "Compromise?" "Well, maybe." Carefully, Bullet took up the parts of the dismantled outboard, setting them down on fresh newspapers spread out on a shelf. He gathered up the soiled papers from the table and shoved them into the wastebasket. He washed his hands to get the gas off them. Patrice took a chicken out of the refrigerator and set it on the counter, where he disjointed it with a cleaver. Bullet didn't want to talk about O.D., but there was something he did want to know. "How'd you know?" he asked Patrice's back. The shoulders shrugged beneath a plaid woolen shirt. You have the appearance of having slept in your clothes. You have stubble on your head. You usually take care of your appearance, not because you are vain, I think, but proud." Bullet ran his hand over his scalp, then over his chin. The scant hairs on his face were soft, but his head felt rough, scratchy. "I forgot." "Which is not like you," Patrice said. Bullet didn't say anything. Patrice dried the pieces of chicken with a paper towel. Then he took out mustard, oil, and a head of garlic, from which he pulled off 2 cloves. He crushed those, then mixed all the ingredients together in a small bowl. He melted butter on the stove, brushed that over the chicken pieces, and set them under the broiler. He started some rice, cut 2 tomatoes in half and put them on a baking sheet, then sat down to shell some peas. Bullet stood watching, waiting for Patrice to speak. It was obvious that there was something Patrice was going to say. "When I was 15 and the Germans came," his light voice said as his fingers clumsily pulled apart the pods, "I had no family in our village. The couple who had raised me, they had a dairy herd and a small business for making cheese. They needed a boy for the labor. When the Germans came, they had fled the village. I was nothing to them, just a boy for the labor, so I became a messenger for the Maquis, the resistance. You've heard of it?" Bullet had. He sat down across from Patrice. When his mother shelled peas, it was with one hand, holding the long pods at her fingertips, then squeezing until they split open to let the green pellets fall into the bowl. Patrice, missing fingers, needed both hands. "I was small and clever. I knew the countryside. I was a courier, a runner. I had my message memorized. We never used anything written down. I was too young, too weak physically to be used in raids or as an escort to travelers. They called me La Chienne, the Old One. So you see, I even had my own code name, and I was proud. When I was brought in for questioning, you see, we had destroyed a bridge, a railroad bridge that spanned a broad ravine, a supply route. Our work was to plan and achieve such destruction, to impede and hinder whenever possible. After a success, of course, the enemy reacted strongly, as we had known they would. You see, we were a country town, a farming town, unimportant except for their pride. So when I was brought in, what I had to conceal was a route along which we could move people, our own or those who were escaping from the country into the mountains into Spain. The enemy knew, because we had our traitors, that there was a party of men traveling at that time. They did not know where or when. That I knew. Why their choices fell on me I don't know, except that perhaps they realized at last that a boy with no ties, no family upon whom retribution might fall, was a boy the Maquis might use." Patrice looked straight at Bullet, who sat listening. They were correct, and very angry. They had been made to look foolish, a resistance cell operating under their very noses, under their very mustaches. The interview did not take long, and much of it I do not remember. Memory selects. I do not recall the fear or the pain, which is not surprising. Those are physical sensations. They are either to come present or past. When present, they dominate. Before, after, they are not. That is curious, isn't it? Bullet wasn't interested in the speculative question. What? If I work for it, I can bring up the sound of the voices, questioning. Even after all these years, I can see the cleaver, an ordinary kitchen cleaver very like my own, with which they threatened me, and my hands I can see, spread out on the sheet that covered the tabletop, because the blood shoots out so. Patrice looked down at his hands. Bullet had his eyes on Patrice's gnome face. "Courage I have. Of vanity?" He shrugged, and his eyes were humorous. "A little. They questioned. I continued my pretense of ignorance, and the terror was no pretense. I remember it as if it were not my own event, as if I had not been there myself. The boy at the table and the men around him. Then I heard a voice behind me, some officer who was just come into the interrogation room, and he asked, 'Who is this boy?' And then my courage failed. They could know by asking, and nobody had been interested. Just another boy, orphaned and ordinary, a scrawny and uncared boy who survived somehow. But we knew by then the workings of their minds, and what they did to such as I." "What do you mean, such as you?" Bullet wondered, but Patrice went on. "So I told them how large a party, from what direction, along which route, at which time, Even then I hoped to warn the party. That was what I hoped, to make meaningless my betrayal. I knew the countryside. I was quick enough. The information would be useless to them. They were pleased. They pulled a brand from the fire. It was October then, too, and cold, as it is in October in my own country. Frosts there begin in September. They cauterized the wounds, an act of mercy perhaps. I fainted. You see, I had not known I would faint. You can understand that. I had not known I would lose those minutes. How many were lost I do not know, except that they had carried me outside and left me, for anyone who passed by to see, and take warning. So that when I arrived at the place I had told them of, a long passage between hills, a narrow pathway with which I approached from the ridge, I was too late. The party, too distant to call out, they moved like shadows among trees, among rocks. The enemy lay in wait, concealed among the hillsides, silent. The party had some arms, rifles, pistols, knives, of course. They moved like herded sheep into the ambush, while I watched. I had to stay to make the report. 6 men, 20 soldiers. The soldiers moved to encircle the party before they made their attack. They wanted captives, of course. This the men knew. All of the soldiers commenced firing at a signal, to wound and disabled. We were accustomed to act quickly and take whatever shelter afforded. For a few minutes the air was filled with gunshots. I watched and counted. The enemy closed its circle. When only 2 of the party were left alive, there is a stillness to the dead that is unmistakable, and a man whose brains lie outside of his skull will not live. The enemy ceased firing. The soldiers stood to rush. One man was on the ground helpless. The other stood against the tree because his leg ran with blood. He had some time. He had some ammunition. He shot his wounded companion, then fired into the rush of soldiers, who automatically fired back as their captain called out orders to stop them. Of the 20, 8 returned unharmed, and they bore with them 5 wounded. Of the 6, none. Patrice's hands went back to work. Bullet waited for the point of the story. This I reported that same night, because it had to be known what information the enemy had. This I reported weeping with shame and regret. Don't be a fool, they told me. Your body betrayed you. You didn't betray us. They sent me away to the coast. Patrice dumped the pods into the garbage. He turned the pieces of chicken in the broiler. He ran a pot of water for the peas, putting a spoonful of sugar into it. He stirred the mustard mixture and took a jar of breadcrumbs out of the refrigerator. Why tell me about it? Bullet asked. I don't get it. Patrice answered without turning around. I have told only 2 people who needed to know if I was equal to an assignment. They both felt pity, mercy, compassion, although that was not their main concern, nor why I told them. After many years I tell it again. And you are pitiless. That was true enough. What good does pity do? I don't criticize. I didn't tell you for the pity of it. I only observe. Then he pulled the pan of chicken out of the broiler and proceeded to paint it with the mustard coating, then covered each piece with bread crumbs and dribbled butter over that. Chicken Diablo, he announced, slipping it back into the broiler. After the years of hunger, I never tire of food. Patrice, I really don't understand, Bullet said. Ah, will you set the table? I don't know if you knew you didn't understand. It's good to know that. You aren't making any sense, Bullet said. He got up and set the table, knives, forks, napkins, glasses. He wanted to know what the story was supposed to mean, because he had a feeling it meant something, and Patrice thought it would mean something to him. Because my body betrayed me, but I think your spirit betrays you, and you can no longer compromise that. I should have warned you. It is speculative thought. Well, Bullet was willing to consider that. I didn't think compromising was what I did, he said. As if you had no heart, Patrice told him. Look, Patrice, Bullet warned the man. Patrice's face was not afraid, just concerned. The eyes steady and the full mouth still. Bullet felt his shoulders sag. He couldn't work out the connections, but he could feel them. He poured himself a glass of milk and set the carafe of white wine by Patrice's place, because he could see that he might have been betraying himself, and Patrice was right. The provocation was no excuse. Can I use your phone? He asked. He dialed and waited through the long ringing. The phone was on his father's desk. Finally his mother picked it up. It's me, he said. I'm calling to say I won't be home until later. Bullet? She asked. Yeah, I'm having dinner in town. She waited a few seconds. "That has nothing to do with me," she said. "I know that," he answered, irritated. "Just so you do," she snapped. Then Bullet grinned into the phone. He knew what it was. The old man was right there listening, and she was making it clear to him and to Bullet where she stood. "Are we alone?" he whispered loudly into the phone. She didn't know what to say. He could hear that. He waited. He could almost hear her thinking. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. They hung up.